Come what may, bring it on. I'm gonna love it.
Welcome to LDS Unmarried Life, a podcast for single members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who find themselves single either because they're divorced, widowed, or not yet married. There is no affiliation with the church. You can find this podcast on AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and now on iHeartRadio as well, which is great. And my new book is out. You can find that on AnnetteTalks.com or on Amazon. And that's the one that I wrote with my friend Steve about dating after divorce in the church. So I suggest that you check that out because I think it's pretty decent. And today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I have decided that coming up on July 4th, I wanted to talk about how we as members of the church can make sure that we're doing everything that we can to maintain our liberties and regain those that we've lost. And so I went out and found someone that is an expert in this area. He was actually recommended by a friend of mine, and his name is Connor Boyack, and he is joining me today. And just to give you a little background, I went to his website, and this is what he says. Author of over a dozen books, podcaster, public speaker, beekeeper, and ska fan. I thought that was funny. I haven't heard ska in a long time.
There's a few of us left.
Yeah.
We still listen to it.
Awesome. So I found you because a friend recommended you, and I picked up your book, Latter-day Liberty, A Gospel Approach to Government and Politics. And I thought, yeah, that's awesome. That's exactly what I want. And I read it and took a lot of notes, and it got me thinking. And you're also the president of the Libertas Institute, right, in Utah. What is that, a think tank?
Yeah, so we are a think tank in Utah, kind of a free market think tank, and so we work on state and local laws trying to create more freedom here in the Beehive State. And we've been around since about 2011, and we've changed dozens of laws to really positively impact people's lives, so we've been having a lot of fun.
So do you write white papers at this think tank, or how do you influence laws?
We call ourselves more of a do tank than a think tank. Traditionally, think tanks will write white papers that 4 people read and they gather dust on a shelf. We're far more tactical. We try and focus on things that will actually impact people, that they'll actually do. So, for example, rather than white papers, we'll do a lot more videos because people will watch those on social media, or our policy briefs that we do put out are like 6 pages long and lots of pictures and graphs, and just to make it more digestible. So we're always trying to find ways to educate people, but in a way that they will it'll catch their attention, it'll persuade them. So the days of the white paper are basically gone. Sometimes the really big academic research institutions will do those just because that's what they need to do to deliver all the content that they've done. But again, very few, like the lay public is not going to be persuaded by that. Elected officials aren't going to read it. So we're always trying to devise ways that we can narrowly target the precise people that we're going after. And, we're all busy, right? We got read this headline there and, like this tweet over there. And we're just kind of always distracted. So we always try to figure out how to insert ourselves into the limited attention people are giving out these days, and then try and capture their attention and continue to nurture and educate them over the months and years.
Awesome. So do you try to directly influence lawmakers, or are you more disseminating your information to the public at large in Utah? Or?
We kind of split and do both. We publish a lot of books and do events and things like this to educate the broader public and kind of have their support as we then go up to the Capitol and advocate, with lawmakers and try and get our stuff passed. And so we kind of try and bridge the two. If we're only talking to lawmakers, but we don't really have the public on our side, or we haven't really galvanized the public, then we're not going to be able to be as successful. So definitely we need to do both. And, if we go out and educate the public and then rely on them to change the law, well, they don't know how to do that. They're not organized. They're unfamiliar with the process. And so we've educated them, but to what end? So we're kind of we see ourselves as kind of the connective tissue between the two.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds like a really good strategy. So you're the president of that, and then you also do education for kids. You're the president of the Association for Teaching Kids Economics.
Yeah, so this is an effort to get free market economic content into K through 8 schools. where often it's not taught. And if anything is taught, it's quite the opposite of free market economics. And so we produced a series of books called the Tuttle Twins that are designed to teach young children about free market ideas. And so now we're building curriculum around those books so that we can then partner with schools to use that curriculum and use the books in their classrooms to expose a lot more kids to these ideas.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I read somewhere on your website maybe that you're not even just going for millennials, but you wanted to reach kids when they're much younger. And
Yep.
yeah, that makes sense because the earlier someone learns something, the longer it sticks with them, the deeper it sinks in. So
That's exactly right. I mean, like so many organizations are trying to educate adults, but by then they've been propagandized for 2 decades in a very, socialist leaning, big government type philosophy that's often conveyed through public and higher education. So we basically say parents want to be able to supplement that or counter that oftentimes, but they don't know how. So we basically give those like-minded parents some tools so that they can help their children develop critical thinking skills and be able to observe, oh, well, wait a minute, your teacher said this, but how about this over here? And too often parents have felt ill-equipped to be able to do that on their own. How do you talk to a young kid about, equal treatment under the law or civil liberties or free markets? And so we facilitate those conversations so that parents can make sure that they're exposing their kids to these time-tested true principles, so that they don't just, get on the school conveyor belt and become a democratic socialist on the other end and, help perpetuate the problems that we're trying to combat. So it's very much an effort to get into the school system, get into the rising generation, and compete for their hearts and minds and affection, so that we're not just giving the other side, the most formative years and then waiting until they're adults before we start talking to them about what things that matter.
yeah, and you can see right now that's obviously too late for a lot of people. I mean,
It's never too late. Never too late. It
well,
just takes a lot
like
more
it.
effort.
It feels like it. You're right. It just takes more effort with adults.
Yep.
But this latest wave of socialism loving has taken me by surprise because I've never seen anything so virulent in my lifetime. It's like, do people really like AOC so much? It's amazing to me. And so this is one of the reasons why I decided we need to talk about this, what we can do to counter that. And I tend to believe that we need to focus on what it is that we want instead of what we don't want. And so I'm glad that your books are about promoting the free market as opposed to fighting socialism, right?
Yeah, that's actually a very important point. Quite often people are opposed to something and they want to say no, and they're anti this, and anti-war is a great example. Like, it's very easy to be anti-war, but it's far more difficult, I think, to be pro-peace, to actually foster solutions and work towards efforts and campaigns and so forth that will actually foster peace and create more community and cohesion between children of God on the other side of the world. So that's very critical. In fact, John Adams had a great example of that when he was talking about the French Revolution, and he was writing a letter to his wife Abigail, and he says something to the effect of, like, it's very easy to tear things down, but there are so few men who know how to build up in its place, right? Because here we saw in France, they're just tearing down these institutions, and in some cases, rightly so. There were a lot of problems in France, but you had all these people just trying to tear the government into shambles, but you didn't have this educated, literate, principled class of people who knew what to build in instead. It very much was just, let's tear it down, and then who cares what happens. John Adams' perspective was, man, where are the people who are going to be able to build it? So I think the same thing in our society, too. It's very easy to point to the problems and say, I'm anti this and I oppose that. But where are the people who are actually trying to think of the solutions that can legitimately try and do good things in the stead of all the bad stuff we're trying to get rid of?
Yeah, I think that's hugely important. Well, you see that a little bit off topic, but you see that when we go into other countries and we take out the dictator that was there, thinking we've got to get rid of this really bad guy, and then what comes in his place? Usually
Right.
something worse, some worse group, or chaos or whatever. So yeah, I'm a big believer in we got to figure out what it is that we want and then go after that. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking on this too, as far as combating socialism, but instead of doing that, promoting the free market. And like, I almost think there needs to be a way to teach people that all the old stuff that we used to love, that I used to love as a kid, is new again. It's cool again, right? The founders are cool. Like, free markets are cool. Liberty is awesome, right? I keep thinking there needs to be a way to teach people that they'll see it as not, oh, those old white folks, the, old white slave owners from back in the day. There's got to be a way to teach them that they catch fire with the same fire that we have for liberty, for freedom, for being able to make our own choices in life and not having the big nanny government. And that's the stuff that goes on in my head. But one of the things that I really wanted to talk about, or the angle that I'm coming from, I've been thinking a lot lately about what President Nelson said about how we're running out of time in this last general conference. And that's been kind of a theme of mine lately. And so, when he says that, and there's all this emphasis on gathering, right? We're supposed to be spreading the gospel with our neighbors and around the world, and also doing gathering beyond the veil, right? So we're supposed to do missionary work, and we're supposed to do temple work and family history work. And so part of me says, okay, so we're running out of time, so let's just focus on missionary work and not worry about anything else. And then the other part of me says, okay, but if you try to just focus on missionary work and you don't worry about maintaining your religious liberties, you're not going to be able to do any of that missionary work. So It's like you have to have both of those things going on at the same time. And I found this quote in your book that I wanted to read, because this kind of was a smack in the face of this is the way we should be thinking. And it's kind of a long quote, but it's such a great one that I wanted to read it. And this is from President Ezra Taft Benson, who I remember, and a lot of the younger folks don't, but he was agriculture secretary, wasn't he?
Yes,
yeah.
Under Eisenhower, yep.
Yes. So this is what he said. Of course, and this is talking about the war in heaven, which we can get into a little bit after I read this, but it says, of course, the war in heaven over free agency is now being waged here on earth. And there are those today who are saying, look, don't get involved in the fight for freedom. Just live the gospel. That counsel is dangerous, self-contradictory, unsound. Now, part of the reason we may not have sufficient priesthood bearers to save the Constitution, let alone to shake the powers of hell, is because, unlike Moroni, I fear, our souls do not joy in keeping our country free. And we are not firm in the faith of Christ, nor have we sworn with an oath to defend our rights and the liberty of our country. Moroni raised the title of liberty and wrote upon it these words: in memory of our God, our religion and freedom and our peace, our wives and our children. Why didn't he write upon it, just live our religion? There's no need to concern yourselves about your freedom and your peace, your wives and your children. The reason he didn't do this was because all these things were a part of his religion, as they are of our religion today. Should we counsel people, just live your religion? There's no need to get involved in the fight for freedom? No, we should not, because our stand for freedom is a most basic part of our religion. This stand helped us get to this earth, and our reaction to freedom in this life will have eternal consequences. Man has many duties, but he has no excuse that can compensate for his loss of liberty.
It's powerful.
Yeah, that pretty much tells us we have a mandate to protect our liberties.
You raised a good point earlier, though, that without essential freedoms like property rights and freedom of association, you can't have religious liberty. You can't have missionary work. We can't build chapels if you don't have the right to own and use property the way you want. You can't have missionary work if you don't have freedom of association. And so there are these fundamental principles and doctrines and laws, legal principles upon which the success of the church and the spread of the gospel are based. So it's very easy for people to compartmentalize and kind of passive aggressive members of the church. I don't want contention. I don't want to do politics. I don't want to get involved in legal stuff. And, at a superficial level, it makes sense. And yet you see quotes like that one and so many others from leaders of our church since its founding by Joseph Smith or Restoration, where they're making very clear how central this duty is and this fight is to our purposes. It's not a separate appendage. It's not a tangent. It's not a, hey, in your free time, you should go vote, because that's important. No, it's central and it's so fundamentally connected. There's a fantastic quote I love. There's so many, and in Latter-day Liberty, I share a bunch of them. But this one was from President Marion G. Romney. And I'm going to quote only part of it, but he says, the time Lucifer was cast out of heaven, his objective was and still is to deceive and to blind men and to lead them captive at his will. So, okay, step number one, all members of the church will agree with that. That's what Lucifer is all about. Well, he continues to say, this he effectively does to as many as will not hearken unto the voice of God. His main attack is still on free agency. When he can get men to yield their agency, he has them well on the way to captivity. Oh, okay, yeah, members of the church are still nodding their head like, yeah, that makes sense. We think of, pornography and drugs and gambling and kind of the typical examples by which Lucifer is trying to tempt people. So I think the average member of the church is still with us in this quote. Here's where we start to lose a bunch of them, I think. He then continues and says, we who hold the priesthood, and by extension, I'd say all members of the church, he's talking to the brethren here, must beware concerning ourselves that we do not fall into the traps that Lucifer lays to rob us of our freedom. Here's the kicker, in my opinion. We must be careful that we are not led to accept or support in any way any organization, cause, or measure which in its remotest effect would jeopardize free agency, whether it be in politics, government, religion, employment, education, or any other field. It is not enough for us to be sincere in what we support. We must be right. I think that's where we lose a ton of members of the church, because it requires study. It requires discernment. It requires careful, thoughtful pondering and analysis of like, oh, wait a minute, what do I believe? And what am I advocating for? And what organizations and causes? And, it's not just about what feels good and what if I'm sincere in what I'm doing, I have to be right. Oh, dang, I got to think through that. I got to research. I got to read scriptures. I got to read Latter-day Liberty, right? Like, and that just requires work. And my perspective, my criticism of our community is that I feel like we've lost that. I feel like, this is kind of the meat of the gospel in some respects. This is the fundamental principles of agency and freedom and so forth. The war on heaven continues today. I feel like so many members of our church have contented themselves with the milk of the gospel and of these issues, and they're unwilling to go after the meat, and the meat is where we need to be getting. And obviously we're all on the same path, or different paths, or rather same path, different steps of that path, but so we have to be patient with and supportive of those who are kind of on their own timeline and so forth. But I do have that frustration a little bit, because you and I can read these quotes and how profound and fundamental they are, but I think that demonstrates not only how far maybe we've deviated from that standard as a community, but the urgency with which, kind of like you were pointing out, the hastening and so forth, the urgency that's always being communicated to us with which we need to attend to matters like this.
Yes, and I think, part of that is because we live in a country where we enjoy freedoms. And I think a lot of people either don't want to believe that we could lose these freedoms and that we're already losing them, or they just can't handle the idea of what can I do about it. If we're such a divided country right now that you express any kind of opinion that doesn't match what the other side believes, and they will come after you. There was a Facebook post the other day. It was a Denver Post article, and we're over here in this purplish state that's starting to go more blue. And the article was about how the governor here just signed a law outlawing conversion therapy, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I'm like, oh gosh, we're always trying to legislate stuff that we think is bad for some reason. But let's ignore the fact that just took away somebody's freedom to make the choice to go and get that therapy if they want it, or the therapist's right to give that therapy, right? And so I went on there and I just made some offhand comment like, well, yeah, what does freedom of speech matter when you've got a social agenda? And I was pounced on by all sides. And what happened? Almost immediately, it turned into a personal attack. It wasn't that let's discuss the issue. It was like within 2 minutes, a guy comes on and says, oh, she's a Mormon podcaster from Arizona. I'm like, okay, well, first of all, I don't live in Arizona, so I don't know what you're looking at. But what did he do? He went right to my Facebook page, looked me up, figured out who I was, and started to denigrate me instead of talking about the issue. And so I think sometimes some of us in this climate are a little worried or timid about getting out there and putting our necks out, because that's what happens, Can
I offer a point here? So you and I were talking before we started recording about one of the things we want to chat about is kind of methods that we can get more involved and be more engaged in this. And one of my fears is that people mistake movement for motion, right? Like you've heard this principle before, like I'm spinning my wheels. Oh, wait, but I'm going nowhere. I'm in the same place, right? I'm not actually moving forward. And I kind of think of that way with social media, right? Like people might feel like engaging others online and expressing their opinion and debating, the new town square, right? Exchange of ideas. And to some degree, sure, I don't think that that's entirely inaccurate. But oftentimes I feel like people on social media are letting off steam, right? They're just kind of venting and angry and kind of getting out their 2 cents. And then I think of this, well, wait a minute, like steam can actually be extremely powerful when harnessed. Like you can move this heavy locomotive just with steam, right? If you figure out how to harness it, channel it, and apply that energy towards actual movement. So I think part of the challenge too is that many members of the church, the church certainly is not short of saying to vote, or here in Utah, the church will say, go to your caucus meetings, but short of very basic stuff like that, the institution of church is not facilitating any, directions or meetings or organizations or anything like that. So members are left to their own devices. And I think a lot just don't really know, beyond doing their civic duty and voting, how to actually apply their steam, how to actually get involved, how to actually be productive. But, you point out such an important thing with this underlying idea that we were talking about, this freedom of choice, right? Whether it's conversion therapy or, cake making for a gay couple or, whatever the issue is. And I love this quote by David O. McKay. He says, next to the bestowal of life itself, the right to direct that life is God's greatest gift to man. One of the most urgent needs today, of course, now I said this decades ago, one of the most urgent needs today is the preservation of individual liberty. Not missionary work, not home teaching, now ministering. Like, these are all important, obviously, right? But here's Prophet of the Time saying one of the most urgent needs today is the preservation of individual liberty. Freedom of choice, he says, is more to be treasured than any possession earth can give. It is inherent in the spirit of man. It is a divine gift to every normal being, whether born in abject poverty or shackles at birth by inherited riches. Everyone has this most precious of all life's endowments, the gift of free agency, man's inherited and inalienable right. And the thing that was mind-blowing to me as I was working on this book years back, I wrote this in 2011, 2012. When I was working on this book, I was blown away by the fact this idea kept coming to my mind of, war on agency. And yeah, we read about it in the scriptures and we know a little bit about it. But then I would come across these quotes that were making the point of like, well, look, the war on agency continues, right? This wasn't just a one-time thing. Lucifer is utilizing the same tactics today as he was then. President Hinckley has a great quote on that, on point, that I included in the book. So I'm thinking this over and over as I'm working on the book, and I realize, you know what? I figured it out. I know why we're losing. I know why we're letting things slip. It's because we have no idea, we collectively as members of the church have not really internalized the fact that this war is still happening. And you cannot win a war you don't know is happening, right? Like if you don't realize that you're in the middle of a football game, you're not going to grab the ball and run to the other end zone. You're just going to stand there like watching all the motion. Oh, what's happening, right? Like if you, for whatever reason, don't realize that you're in the middle of that game, you will never win. You will never defend against the opposition. You'll never succeed. So too with the war on heaven. Like if we don't wake up and realize that war is continuing today, that Satan is employing the same strategies now as he did then, and what does that mean and how does that apply? I mean, you go to the temple and you watch, the video there, and he's very clear about how this type of stuff is done. And so I just feel like I just want to shout grab all my fellow members of the church by the arms and wake up, right? We see this in the scriptures over and again. Wake up, shake off the dust, break off the chains. And it's this theme over and over again where members of the church back in Book of Mormon times, early church members today are, and myself, I'm not on a rammy-umptum here. I mean, myself in many respects as well, but we have this tendency to fall asleep at the wheel, and all is well in Zion, right? And things are good, and I have a good job, and I get along with my neighbors, and things are just great. Like we get comfortable, and we forget the urgency that's there. We forget that there's this spiritual war that we're in the middle of. And Elder H. Berlin Anderson had a great quote on this. I'm going to paraphrase and butcher a little bit, but he says, if your neighbor comes to your property line and starts to encroach upon it, if you don't know where that property line is, you will never be able to point to it and say this far and no further. And so he's talking a little bit about property rights, but the same thing applies to the war on agency, that if we don't know where the boundaries are, if we don't know who the opposition is, if we don't know the tactics that they're doing, we'll never be able to check their advances. We'll never be able to defend against their attacks. And so I feel at the end of the day that we're losing because we collectively don't even really realize the implications of that war today, 2019, what's happening around us quietly, spiritually, temporally, economically. It's a big issue. And you talk to the average member of the church about this stuff, and you're just going to get like wide eyes and, oh, wait, what? Too confrontational, too contentious. And it's tough because like this is war, and that has very profound implications. It's not just, eat, drink, and be merry and go to church and do your ministering and all will be well in Zion. Like, no, there's some tough times ahead. And if we're not doing our part, then I don't think we'll be in as good a position as we should be.
Yes, and I see it more and more each day, and it's frankly, it's a little alarming, because a few of the things I think I emailed to you. One of the concerns that I have right now, and I have no idea what to do about this, and maybe we can spitball a little bit, because one of the big problems that I see right now, and it's not even coming from the government, it's coming from these private owners of Facebook and YouTube or Google, right? And that are deplatforming people that they don't want to hear from. And so they can silence, huge swaths of us. And I've already seen it happen with a few people that, have several million subscribers. They're being demonetized or their videos are being taken down because they don't conform to their community standards, whatever. Facebook even did something like that to me. They wouldn't let me advertise, and they will never give me a reason. They give me you violate community standards, and then they give you a list of community standards that don't make any sense at all. It's gobbledygook. Mm-hmm. And so, even if there's people like me who are totally willing to get out there and say, all the important things that I want to say. I made some YouTube videos back in the day. I think maybe 20 people watched them or something. But even if I did, find a way to reach the masses, now we're at a point where if YouTube won't let me stay on, or Facebook won't let me stay on, and Facebook means Instagram because it's the same guy, I don't really have freedom of speech. I mean, if I can go outside and talk to my neighbors, that's about, it's not quite that bad, but that's where we're heading. Do you have any thoughts on what we can do as a people to try and change that?
So this is a tough issue that a lot of organizations like mine are actively talking about right now, because it is definitely happening more to right of center people. I even saw a few days ago, Pinterest had banned live action, which is kind of like an anti-abortion, pro-life, website encouraging opposition to Planned Parenthood and so forth. And they got banned on the allegation that they didn't meet the website's terms and conditions. This is Pinterest, mind you, very flowery, lovey-dovey, lady-friendly kind of stuff, because they were promoting violence and something like they were anti-science, right? It was like you're anti-science and you're promoting violence. And it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And so, in my heart of hearts, I'm a free market guy. And Mark Zuckerberg, even if he's like a robotic Sith Lord that, has bad intentions, has the right to build a platform and do whatever he wants. I think a conservative cake maker should be able to say, I don't want to make a cake for gay people, go find somewhere else. So as much as we tend to think of these huge social media platforms as like the public square, I feel like the more they do this, it's just going to prompt the next, innovative person to be able to create a system that's going to guarantee freedom for all. I mean, MySpace was the only player in town for a while. It was like the big thing that no one would be able to tackle. And now, like, no one's on MySpace. The whole website imploded. Yeah. So I feel like the bad actions, I almost encourage these guys to do this because it's so absurd. It's getting to the point of absurdity where it's going to encourage a lot of people to flock to it, or it's going to give them their come to Jesus moment and say, well, crap, we're going to lose, a huge market share, or a competitor's going to spring up because we're pushing all these people away. So I kind of like the free exchange of ideas and freedom of association, and let private owners of companies do stupid stuff, and maybe people will migrate elsewhere. As much as it's not fun, I mean, I've been targeted for stuff like this too, and nobody likes when you're on the receiving end of it. But I think at the end of the day, like this, the broader question here is, how do we actually have a voice? How do we communicate with the masses? And one of the things I've become a big believer in is you basically can't rely on third parties, especially with potentially unpopular messages like ours. And so, for example, having a direct way to contact those who are in your sphere of influence is critical. So as we're selling, in our case, like a lot of our books, and we're reaching people in our organization, we make sure to collect their email address and their phone number so that we can have a direct line of communication with those people, rather than simply saying, like our Facebook page, because in a week, Facebook may ban our page. And now we've invested all that time to build this profile, that we've now lost. And so I think it's critical, like I see people who will do little town hall cottage meetings, book clubs at their home, just try to create, opportunities to network together and talk one another and have that face-to-face interaction. Whatever our sphere of influence, I think it's critical that we have as much direct interaction as possible, because the more we rely on these third parties to facilitate those interactions, the more power we're giving them. And then now we're seeing the fruit of that and what they can do.
Yeah, that's for sure. No, that's a really good point. I need to do that myself with my website and my Facebook and my YouTube. I just need to get direct contact, because you're right. I mean, I could be deplatformed anytime. Even on my podcasts, carriers, they could all deplatform me as well. So what suggestions do you have for your average Joe Mormon out there that wants to make a difference, who maybe isn't willing to run for office? Or I think we should be willing to run for office. What was that? There was another quote that I pulled out of here. Oh yeah, President Hinckley. President Hinckley said, "We desperately need moral men and women who stand on principle to be involved in the political process." And I think that means more than just voting.
Yeah.
I think we mostly vote, but I have felt for a while that I'm going to run for office at some point. I just pray that it's not until my girls are raised, because I can't imagine trying to do both at the same time. But running, I guess I shouldn't say other than that. I think we should be willing to run, even if it's a small office. What else can we be doing as members?
So I want to finish the quote that you shared, because I think that's where the power lies, right? So we desperately need, President Hinckley says, moral men and women who stand on principle to be involved in the political process. But then he says, otherwise, we abdicate power to those whose designs are almost entirely selfish. Like, that to me is a prophetic summary of all of human history, that when the people don't rise up, when the lay citizen is not getting involved, I see it in my own line of work, right? The people who rise to positions of authority are those who love authority. They like bossing people around. They like being like mini despots and dictators within their spheres of influence. And especially as government grows and more power attracts up into the executive branch or the governor or the city council, as these positions grow in power and budget and influence, it's just all the more tempting to people who want to command, that size of a budget or that big of a team or, that much jurisdiction. So I think what he's saying here is exactly right, that if we are not involved, if we're not speaking out and getting involved, then we're abdicating power to those whose designs could be selfish. The thing, to answer your question very specifically, I turned to DNC 58, I believe. So it says, we are to be anxiously engaged in a good cause and do many things of our own free will, and to bring to pass much righteousness. I think that's kind of the end of it, right? So anxiously engaged in a good cause. So what I often say in response to this question, because I'm a very involved person, everyone in my neighborhood, my ward knows I'm very involved, and occasionally people kind of like, how do I get involved, or what should I, tell me what to do. And I say, well, my path is not your own, number one, right? You have gifts and a path and, abilities that I don't, and so you got to figure out what it is for you. But I think that the first thing is, like, so I have a longstanding criticism of us as members of the church, and that is, I think we're turning into Pharisees. I think we're very quick to have checklists and to judge other people who don't fit this model that we've built up and layered upon the gospel. I think we have this temptation, just like people in the past did. And I think it's too easy to fall into that trap. For example, I think it's very easy to judge, how often did you do your ministering, and did you pay tithing, and are you not drinking coffee, and, this, that, and the other. And we have these like superficial standards by which we judge our own righteousness, and we wear it on our sleeve like the tassels of yesteryear in the Jewish tradition. How many members of the church are reading D&C 58, the commandment to be anxiously engaged in a good cause, and judging their own, membership in the church or their own righteousness based on this commandment? I don't see the same, especially when you have prophets saying, here's where the urgency lies. There's no more fundamental, responsibility and duty that we have than to defend agency and freedom and so forth. Like, you see the gravity with which this subject has been treated in decades past by leaders of the church. You have commandments like in D&C 58 saying that we have to be anxiously engaged in a good cause and bring to pass much righteousness. And then I observe a substantial disconnect between the gravity, the urgency, the commandments and so forth in this sphere, and the lay membership's commitment to and fulfillment of, or adherence to those ideas. So my criticism is, I think we've veered way off, and we don't want to judge our righteousness based on that, because it's work. It's easier to abstain from coffee than it is to, go to city council meetings and write letters to the editor. So for those who recognize that duty does exist, that there is that commandment, that there is this urgency, then the question becomes how, right? Like, okay, hey, I have the sincere desire to get involved and to make a difference. What do I do? So I always say, by small and simple things are great things brought to pass. Like, I get friends who will look at me and I'm writing books and I lead this organization, I change these laws, and oh man, that's intimidating. I could never do that. Exactly. I don't even know what I'm doing. I have no instruction manual for this. Right? I'm a web developer. I went to school in my first 10, 12 years of my career. I was a web developer. I have no professional background in anything that I'm doing, and yet now I'm very successful at it. So I always tell people that to reassure them, like, just you're a stay-at-home mom, right? You're an English major and you did biology. Like, I don't care, right? My director of policy is a genealogy major. I mean, he's not a policy guy. So anyone can do any of this type of stuff, but by small and simple things. So what I tell people is, first off, do a little cottage meeting. Get together a few people who you think would be interested. Start as a book club. Just pick a book and chat about it informally, and just kind of see who has ideas and who's motivated. Maybe that will then parlay into what I tell people next is do a cottage meeting. Organize 15 people in your neighborhood and invite the mayor, or invite the state legislator, or invite a city council member. Come talk about whatever issues are in the news. Now you've made yourself known to that elected official, that you're a person who can organize some people and that you want to facilitate some accountability and some communication. So what I tell people is, after you've done this little cottage meeting, it's very simple, kind of fun, let's have a little event and dessert and just talk about what's happening in our community. Then what I say is give it a few months, but reach back out to that same elected official who came to your cottage meeting and invite them out to lunch, and just say, hey, I'd love to take you out to lunch in the next few weeks and talk to you about some stuff. You're basically building a relationship with someone in power who can be a conduit for you to help educate you, help train you, help introduce you and network, and make yourself known, like you're developing a brand. And hey, I'm an active person. I'm a concerned citizen. I'm not just a random person on Facebook. I actually want to do things and connect with people. And so I suggested those initial steps because they're very easy, they don't take a lot of time, and they will get your foot in the door to be learning more about what's happening in your community, who's trying to make a difference, whose ideas you like, whose ideas you don't. The critical thing in all of this, though, I think, is education. And that's actually literally why I wrote Latter-day Liberty, because I felt like there was an inadequate single resource that members of the church could look to learn about. Like, I didn't do anything novel. I just, here's a scripture here and here's a quote here. Like, you can go find all this stuff on your own and go on a scavenger hunt and find all the stuff that leaders of the church, past and present, have said. But I wanted something tangible, right? Like your friend, as your hairdresser, you told me, right? Like, yeah. I wanted something that someone could give to someone else and say, read this. So whether it's my book or just reading the scriptures, frankly, go study the war in heaven. Go study agency and ponder how it applies to our day. It doesn't have to be Latter-day Liberty at all. But I think it's really important to have an expanded view about the events that are happening today. It's very easy to get caught in the hustle and Facebook this and Twitter that, and conservatives deplatformed, and Trump said this, and the Supreme Court did that. Very easy to get swept around with every wind of political doctrine, right? I think it's important for us to take a step back from that fray and study fundamental spiritual eternal principles and then step into the fray. But if we don't have that rock, right, if we don't have that doctrinal foundation, it's going to be very easy to say, oh, vote Republican this, or oppose that, and not understand, just like in the book of James, right, that we're blown about with every wind of doctrine that can apply, I think, to political doctrine. So I've seen I've many people who I've talked to about this precise issue who want to get involved. They have this sincere desire, but I start engaging them in a discussion of different doctrines or principles or policies, and they often don't have that foundation. So I say, take some time, do a little bit of study, dip your toe in the water, and because what I see too is people who have the desire, they burn out very quickly, right? They'll go to a meeting, they'll run for office or city council, and they lose, and then they just disengage completely. So you got to develop a little bit of motivation. You got to develop a little bit of momentum. Start very small. Do something very simple. Write a letter to the editor about something that matters. Start a Facebook group about a community issue that's happening. Just start very simple and don't spend a lot of time, but just dip your toe in the water. You'll get accustomed to it. You'll learn from mistakes. You can build upon that as you go. I just think what's needed is a recognition of how important this is, and I think that's what's often lacking. You can be single, you can be divorced, you can be married, you can be running 3 businesses at once and still dedicate a little bit of time to incorporating this into our gospel study, to incorporating this into our online social media use. Like, it's not that this is going to take a lot of time. It can over time if we end up like me doing it full time, right? Like, there's some people who end up doing that, but for the average person, it doesn't take a lot of time. I think it's really just prioritization. And I fear that too few are prioritizing these type of matters. And then I go and I read these things in the scriptures and from leaders of the church. I'm like, oh man, like, we've got a lot of work to do. And so long-winded answer, but the short nuts and bolts is anyone can do this. Start very small. Just start doing a little bit of study, talking to a few people in your spheres of influence, in your social circles, get a little book club together, and just let it grow over time and see what it turns into.
Great. No, that's awesome. And as you were talking, you were talking about how everybody's on a different path. It made me, I wanted to add one last thing, so we're running out of time here. But, I am where I'm at in my path because a while back I decided I was going to start following some promptings. And so I think if people will turn to Heavenly Father in prayer and say, I have a desire to serve my country in some way, some small way, big way, whatever. What is it that I should be doing? That I think individuals will be guided to where they would be most effective. And we all have different talents and abilities and skills. And so I think the Spirit will tell us, this is your skill right here. So I'm going to send you in this direction, and you're going to do this. Like, I'm not a very good organizer, but I'm a decent public speaker, and I don't mind being in front of people. So let me public speak. That's awesome. But I'm not going to be a secretary or running someone's campaign. So I want to add that. And I think that's great what you said. Also, I want to reiterate that, yes, educate yourselves. And come follow me is a really good time to talk to your family about these things. When we're talking about gospel discussions, it'll naturally lead into discussions on, we're still fighting the war in heaven here on earth, and we still need to maintain our liberties, or else we're not going to have, our agency won't matter if we don't have liberties. And right. So that's a good place to continue the discussion, either on your own or with your family, with your spouse, your friends, or whatever. This is great. I really appreciate that. You've given me a lot to think about. I want to recommend that people check you out. Your website is connorboyack.com. That's yep. CONNORBOYACK.com. And is there any other place that they can reach you, or is that the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, that's the best place. You can find a lot of the books I've written there, and I'm very easily Googleable. I've written a whole bunch of books on different issues, and so connorboyack.com is a great place to start.
Great. And I don't know if I mentioned on air, but my kids are reading the Tuttle Twins books, and they love them. I didn't tell them what they were about. I just said, hey, look at these fun books. And
awesome.
So they're being indoctrinated. So
someone's got to do it.
Yes, exactly.
The right person's got to do it.
Yeah. If it's going to be anyone's going to indoctrinate our kids, it should be us. So I appreciate the work that you're doing and the books that you've written and the work that you're doing to educate people about the free markets and the agency and liberty and all that. I want to be you when I grow up, I think. So, but for now, I'm just going to have you on my show, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you wanted to say in parting?
No, just I think we've summed it up. This is such an important topic. I appreciate the opportunity to come on your show and talk about it because I think it's very easy to ignore it. And, oh, yeah, Benson, that was, a few decades ago. That doesn't apply anymore. Oh, David O. McKay. Oh, President Hinckley, whatever. And these are eternal issues that are going on. The war on heaven has not stopped. It's not, things aren't well in Zion.
No, so, if anything, it's more intense now than it was. We have passed a point of being able to just pretend everything's all good. We've got to be engaged now.
Time to put our shoulder to the wheel, so let's all do it.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you for listening to LDS Unmarried Life. I will post the link to Connor's website and to his book on my website. And once again, that's at nettalks.com. Go check me out. That's where LDS singles gather.
I'm gonna bloom where I'm planted. I won't take things for granted. Come what may, bring it on. I'm gonna love it.